Do you have any tips for teachers? How can they support somebody with autism?
Be patient and be aware. I've lost count of the amount of teachers I've met in the wider school where I've had to teach them what a meltdown was, because as a student has flown off the rails, stormed out the class, and they've called it a tantrum, and I've just had to say it's not a tantrum, and that's really harmful to say that.
Yeah. Because if somebody's struggling to cope and then they're being treated like they've done it somehow deliberately, it must be quite hard for that person.
Because a lot. So one thing, the difference I see between tantrums and meltdowns is meltdowns are kind of involuntary. I don't get to choose if I want to have one. Tantrums usually done by children, and they do it to manipulate you into doing something. But if you call a meltdown a tantrum, you're implying that the autistic person's manipulating you into doing something, and they're not.
No, this is just an overwhelming sensation.
The only other thing I'd say is kind of take an interest. If you know you're going to have an autistic student in your classroom, either do your own research or get to know them. That's the best way to figure out what's going to set them off and what isn't. And that'll be the easiest way for you to prevent it from setting them off.
You've put as well for Autism Awareness Week, there'll be a couple of presentations that you've put together on misconceptions about autism and advice about meltdowns and information about meltdowns. Lastly, or second last, what about your peers?
I'd like to remind them, because ever since I got to high school, it doesn't ever really seem to click. I'm a teenager, the same as everyone else. I get up in the morning, don't want to get out of bed, get to school.
I'm an adult, I don't want to get out of bed.
Make my way through that, I can go home and do what I want. When I joined high school, there was obviously Snapchat, people sending Snapchat, and I never got that. And because I never got it, I got angry at it, and I just snowballed. And I remember sitting in philosophy one day and we were discussing autism for Autism Awareness Week, and someone compared having autism to being a psychopath. They'd seen a very violent meltdown in the courtyard, and they'd said we were psychos for it, and it doesn't feel nice. It makes you feel like an outsider. So just by saying, hey, we're not different to you, we just have different ways of dealing with things.
Absolutely. And there are people who are not in the autistic spectrum who might lash out if they're angry and overwhelmed. That's certainly labelling somebody, isn't it? So what are the key things to remember? And thank you very much for contributing to this.
I'd like to remind that this is just my experience of autism I'm talking about. Other people have their own sort of stories and so on, so it's best if you're trying to learn about someone you know with autism, ask them. They'll be your best source of information. Patience is one of the most important things. It takes us a while to process some things. Just because we don't immediately respond to something doesn't mean we didn't hear you or we don't understand. It just means we're processing it in our mind. Tolerance isn't enough. It's not enough to just say, oh, I'll just tolerate the autistic people in my life. You need to take the step to listen and accept and understand us, because I'll be more likely to accept and understand you if you're more likely to accept and understand me, because we're Duncanrig as well.
Together we are Duncanrig. Thank you so much, C, for your time.